Shambhu rose in a violent anger, like that of a raging fire. His eyes, nose, ears and mouth were letting off innumerable sparks. And with this seething fury, he rushed to the site of the Mahayagna. He stopped himself just outside the sacrificial space and watched everything unfold with his fiery eyes. Mahadeva became terribly enraged, and from the fierce depths of his anger emerged Virabhadrar, who was no different from Mahadeva's own blazing wrath. This is why he is called Rudrakop Sambhava, born of Rudra's fury. Without delay, Mahadeva sent Virabhadrar into the altar where Daksha's grand yagna was underway. Virabhadrar then created his own Bhutaganas, terrifying beings of great power, and began destroying the sacrificial altar of Daksha. Vishnu, seeing this upheaval, tried to stop Virabhadrar. But witnessing this, Shambhu's anger intensified further. He himself stepped into the sacrificial grounds and began destroying everything with his own hands. At that moment, Bhaga, one of the Dwadas Adityas, approached Shambhu in an attempt to stop him. But Mahadeva, with just his fingers, pulled Bhaga's eyeballs out. Next came Surya Bhagavan, approaching after seeing Bhaga's fate. Swami grabbed both of his hands and flung him far away, effortlessly, before he rushed straight toward the main sacrificial altar. Then appeared Martanda, another form of the sun, who mockingly laughed and said, "Come on, I shall fight you." Seeing this disrespect from Martanda towards Shambhu, Virabhadrar stepped in and slapped him so hard that all of Martanda's teeth fell out. Witnessing the sheer destructive force of Mahadeva and Virabhadrar, all the gods and sages fled in fear. Shambhu then turned toward the sacrificial yajna, which had now assumed a living form and was standing within the altar. But upon seeing the raging Shambhu, the sacrifice itself transformed into a deer and fled. It ran all the way to Brahmaloka, with Mahadeva following in pursuit. But fearing Pashupati, the living sacrifice used its Mayajala, the web of illusion, and descended from Brahmaloka, entering into the body of Sati. Shiva, having chased the sacrifice all the way, now found himself beside the lifeless body of Sati. In that instant, he forgot the chase and simply sat down next to her, mourning her deeply. All the beautiful moments they had shared came flooding back into his memory. He began crying aloud, his heart pierced with sorrow like a thorn piercing a rose petal. Kamadeva, seeing Shiva in such a state, pierced the heart of Shambhu with multiple arrows, not to inflame desire, but to keep him grief-stricken enough to prevent the world from being destroyed in rage. It worked. Mahadeva's fury subsided. He began speaking gently to the dead Sati, as if she were only sleeping. He tried to wake her. Tears rolled down from his cheeks, and these divine tears struck fear in the hearts of Brahmadi Devatas, for they knew even a single drop could burn the whole earth to ashes. So they prayed to Shani Bhagavan, the Lord who had once stopped rains for 100 years, to now halt Shiva's tears. Shani accepted their plea. With his power, he managed to stop the tears to some extent. But when he could no longer restrain them, he cast the tears onto a mountain named Jaladharaka. The mountain, unable to withstand the fire of Shiva's sorrow, cracked apart. The tears then spilled into the sea. The sea itself split, and from it a new river emerged, the Vaitarani, which to this day flows through the realm of Yamapatana, the city of the god of death. Then Shiva lifted the lifeless body of Sati onto his shoulder and began wandering across the lands. like a madman. Because the dead body was in constant touch with Shiva, it did not decay, and it was only when the body began to rot that it would fall from his shoulder, allowing Shiva to regain his senses. Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva began deliberating, searching for a way forward. At last, they found a solution, and with the grace of Mahamaya, all three entered into the dead body of Sati. This entire episode isn't just about rage, loss, or cosmic disruption. It is Mahamaya's supreme orchestration, revealing how even Shiva, the untouched, the supreme, can be drawn into grief, madness, and destruction when she wills it so. Sati's decision to abandon her body wasn't rebellion. It was Mahamaya's exit cue. The yajna's destruction wasn't vengeance. It was the unraveling of an ego-fueled, sacrificial delusion, brought down by her touch as a lesson for the future men. Virabhadra's emergence from Shiva's anger shows how even fury becomes a tool in her hands, where usually anger blinds the wielder. Shiva forgetting his purpose after Sati's death shows how even the knower of time gets bound when Mahamaya enters the stage. She enters through delusion, Mohamaya, sets fire to karmic structures, and exits with the promise of rebirth, not just for Sati, but for Dharma itself. Thus, Kamakhya is not a passive witness. She is the scriptwriter, the actress, and the curtain dropper of this divine tragedy. With the grace of Mahamaya, Brahma, Vishnu and Shani, Bhagavan, entered the lifeless body of Sati. What they did next was not an act of violence, but a sacred divine intervention. They began to gently cut her body so that each part would fall upon specific locations on earth, transforming those places into living power centers of Shakti. Her feet were the first to descend. They fell at Devikuta, known today as Devikota in West Bengal. Next, her thighs fell upon Udiyana, now recognized as the Bimala temple inside the Jagannath temple complex in Puri. Then, her Yoni, the divine womb, fell upon the mountain known as Kamagiri in Kamarupa, present-day Kamakhya Kshetra in Assam. Many believe that her navel also fell here, giving Kamagiri its unmatched sanctity. Her breasts, still adorned with golden chains, landed in Jalandhara, Punjab. Her arms and neck fell upon Purnagiri in Uttarakhand. Thus, piece by piece, her divine body sanctified the earth, establishing what are now known as the Shakti Pittas, each one a gateway to the supreme feminine force. But how could Mahadeva ever bear separation from her? Wherever a part of her body fell, he too stayed, manifesting as a Shivalinga beside her, inseparable, eternal, silent. Brahma, Vishnu and Shani were the first worshippers of these sacred sites, offering their devotion and establishing the worship of the goddess in every part of her divine manifestation. At Devikuta, she is worshipped as Mahabhaga. At Udyana, she is Katyayani. At Kamarupa, she is the supreme Kamakhya. At Purnagiri, she becomes Purneshwari. And in Jalandhara, she is Chandi. Her head is said to have fallen a little beyond Kamarupa, where she is venerated as Dikkaravasini, also known as Lalitakanta. It was here, beside her head, that Shiva sat and mourned, overwhelmed by her absence. The mighty lord who swallowed poison and destroyed Tripura now sat in helpless sorrow. So deep was his grief that he abandoned his form altogether, turning into a still, silent Shivalinga out of pain, shame, and love. The Brahmadi Devatas, seeing this, descended from the heavens to console him. But when Shiva reappeared for a moment, they were shocked. He no longer looked like the divine ascetic. He looked like a man devastated, lost, and wounded beyond healing. Their hearts ached at the sight. Brahma, moved by compassion, composed a stotra, a divine hymn, to remind Shiva of who he is. Not just a grieving husband, but the one beyond time, the eternal force, the Lord of all tattvas. After some time, Shiva looked at Brahma and quietly said, "Stay with me, enlighten me of my true self until I am free from this grief." And this is where the Kamakhya Kshetra begins, not just as a sacred hill, but as the crossing point of divine love, separation, and supreme illusion. A place where Mahamaya plays her deepest Leela, and even the greatest gods surrender to her unseen will. Now, the Ananga, the formless one, has to regain a form. It is time for Kamadeva, who was once reduced to ashes by the fiery glance of Shambhu, to be reborn. But nothing in this creation happens without purpose. The depth of a tunnel cannot be analyzed by standing on the surface. This is not just about resurrection. It is about karmic culmination and the unfolding of Mahamaya's plan. The curse must lift where Amba's Yoni, the supreme source, fell. That place is Kamarupa, the seat of Kamakhya. Rati and Kamadeva were filled with joy, yet their hearts ached watching Mahadeva still immersed in grief. The fire of past karma still burned silently within. They approached Vishwakarma, the celestial architect, and unfolded their story, including the path for Kamadeva to regain his divine form. Vishwakarma, the master of divine blueprints, agreed to aid Rati and Ratipati. Together, Rati, Kamadeva, and Vishwakarma undertook a sacred task: to erect a temple in Kamarupa, right where her Yoni fell. To protect and empower this kshetra, they also invoked the presence of the 64 yoginis and Hetukadi Bhairavas. This wasn't just architecture. It was a multi-dimensional yantra brought into form. Now that the kshetra is built around her Yoni, Kamdev got back his Swarup. The form returns to the formless when it aligns with the source. But Mahamaya's Leela was far from over. The time had come for Narakasura, the Asura king, to enter the scene. He had taken refuge in Kamarupa and was a fierce devotee of Kamakhya Amba. Through intense tapas, he had earned boons from her. But during one darshana, he was overtaken by her beauty and desired to marry her. This too was Mahamaya's orchestration, for something else had to unfold through this desire. She smiled, not out of acceptance, but because the future had to arrive. She did not get angry. Instead, she placed a condition that only she, the Supreme, could design. He must build a temple, a tank, and a stone pathway from the Brahmaputra foothills up to the top of Neelachala Parvata, all in a single night. Narakasura, consumed by arrogance, thought this an easy task, forgetting who he was dealing with. He forgot she is Mahamaya. Blinded by his ego, he began the task, powered by his asuric strength. But just before he could finish, Mahamaya made a cock crow, and he believed dawn had broken. In disbelief and despair, he abandoned the task. Lamba, with her cosmic calm, declared he had failed, and she would not marry him. Still, Narakasura retained his boons, and with them, he became a terror. His devotion was real, but not righteous. The play of Mahamaya is not partial. Not all her devotees remain good, and not all evil is forever punished. What is sown must be reaped. A devotee of good character attains her abode. a devotee of bad character receives the karmic fruit in Naraka.
During this phase of inflated ego, Vasishtha Maharishi arrived at Kamarup to have darshana of Kamakhya Amba. But Narkasur, puffed with pride, denied the Rishi entry. His guards turned the great Maharishi away from the temple.
Vasishtha, enraged not just at Narkasura, but at Amba's silence, cursed both. Kamakhya will abandon you, Narkasura. Your downfall is near. And from now on, Kamakhya will be worshipped only through the left-handed path, Vamachara. That was the beginning of the decline. From that moment, the worship of Kamakhya shifted away from Saumya and Sattvika and became overrun by Vamachara, misunderstood, misused, and misdirected by those who no longer saw her as the mother. But even in this, Amba had left a message. I am to be worshipped as the divine mother, not desired like a woman. The learned ones remember this. They resist the curse of Vasishtha and worship her with the purity that befits Jagadamba. But will this not incur the wrath of Vasishtha Maharishi? Yes, it might. But Mahamaya always protects those who walk in truth, even if she does so in hidden and unexpected ways. Before leaving, Vasishtha Maharishi took a vow to remain on Neelachala Parvata until Narkasura fell. His ashrama still exists there, the Vasishtha caves that we visit even today. Thus, this episode of Kamakhya Tattva Bodha ends with a clear call. Not every worship is divine. Not every devotee is worthy. And not every curse is a punishment. Sometimes it is a test.